A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Stephen McAlpine works as a consultant for Christian churches and other organisations navigating their way through an increasingly complex and secular world. And Stephen McAlpine joins us today to discuss US politics, young Zoomers joining more traditional churches and everything else in between. And Stephen, I want to welcome you to 2020 today.
Oh, great to be with you. Just a lot of things in the one basket today, I think.
Yeah, it's a full basket, but it's going to be a fun basket, I can promise you that. But Stephen, did you watch the debate on Friday between President Biden and Donald Trump?
I did watch the debate. I watched it like I used to watch Doctor Who when I was a kid, from behind the couch with my sort of looking between my fingers. So because it was like, oh dear, it was scary at some levels.
So tell me about that. Why is it scary, Stephen? What's so scary about it?
Well, I guess I came into it thinking it's going to be gloves off. Donald Trump's going to be how he is, rude, obnoxious. But I also knew that as I looked at over the last few months, I thought Joe Biden would have to be at his absolute 100% peak to not fumble this. And clearly that wasn't the case. And I think most people realised after the debate, or even 10 seconds into it, that maybe the system had been not telling us exactly how bad Joe Biden was, and that was probably the embarrassment of it. And it feels like that's a dire strait for American politics at the moment. Kind of reflection of it, to be honest.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I heard a fairly good critique of the debate from Ben Shapiro on his podcast, and he said that the mainstream media in America, who, let's be honest, a lot of them are just propaganda arms of the Democrat Party now, have spent 2 years trying to convince Americans and the rest of the world that Biden is with it. You know, there's nothing wrong with him. He's able to lead and he's articulate. And obviously, like you said, that debate, he couldn't hide. And it really was on show, wasn't it, that he's an old man, and whether he's unwell or not, it doesn't look like he's capable of running the free world right now, does it?
No. And look, it's interesting that within the New York Times, Ezra Klein, who's an opinion columnist, had gone out on a limb about 6 months ago and said, no, he shouldn't be running, and this is a progressive paper, and he got pilloried for that. It isn't just that people said he's fine, it's that if anyone said the opposite, they were in league with Trump, or it was misinformation. And Mr. Klein just wrote the other day, seriously, we knew this was the case. So perhaps Donald Trump has been telling lies, but it feels like the Democrat Party got together and just did the same thing. And fact-checking would probably want to run a few fact checks on that, because I think that's the problem. They've been kidding themselves and trying to kid the population as well.
Yeah, and I think, look, there's a little bit of conspiracy theory in all of us, Stephen, but I did speak to someone recently whose husband...
but me.
Well, I spoke to someone whose husband is a congressman in the States, and that couple are pretty well 99.9% sure that ex-President Obama is running Biden and telling him what to do and what to say. And that's probably why the Democrats felt comfortable with him in office, because they knew that he wasn't really the decision maker. He was doing what he was told. Now, whether or not that's true, I don't know, but it definitely looks like Biden is not the only one making the decisions regarding America and the rest of the world.
Yeah, look, I think the other thing too is you have to think about how American presidency works. In one sense, there's a whole machine behind the president, but the president is somehow this avatar in which you put your hopes and dreams, and somehow of what American exceptionalism is, and somehow they've got to reflect it. But the second tier of government in America runs absolutely everything, and I think that's what we fail to remember sometimes. That it really is a cult of a vision and a personality. The American presidency's become that people say we want our president to reflect all the best attributes of us, and that's kind of almost like a religious framework as much as it is anything else. It feels like politics is the new religion in this sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people are feeling more and more disempowered in our modern world, because we are just bombarded with so much negativity through media, mainstream media, social media. It's almost like people are longing for something, aren't they, to give them hope or a sense of purpose or direction, or maybe even a sense of safety.
Yeah, look, and I think the mainstream media has to take a bit of blame for that. All of the institutions in America are actually in trouble. You look at the anti-Semitism issues on the campuses. You look at the mainstream media saying will decide which information should be allowed to be published. And even the big social media groups are doing that too. So information is always going to try and find its way like water to the point it needs to get to. So I think that we're in a real disrupting time at the moment, and I just wonder where it'll go in America if in the next 10 years. It feels like it's at a very pointy stage.
It certainly is. Now, you are our guest, so I'm going to ask you for your opinion. So we've talked about Biden. What are your thoughts on Donald Trump?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't like him as a person. I think he is a braggart. I think he's... but like all presidents, I think he gets some stuff done, and there's some stuff he does do. But I don't think he's a noble person. And if you're looking for a president to be a noble person, I don't think he's that. But I think in one way or the other, unless they put someone else in other than Biden, he'll win. And the whole thing was, you can't keep saying... you can't vote for Trump, so you must vote for our person. You have to say to the Democrats, if you think it's that bad, put someone else up. So clearly there's a little bit of cynicism in the system as well. So I think I probably think that Trump will win if it goes against Biden. And I think he's a disruptor person as well, and people vote for a disruptor at the moment in the Western world. Because if you look at the way France is going at the moment, their elections, their president is suddenly, his party is not winning the election process, the first major elections. If you look at Britain, all of these major Western democracies are having huge swings either way every election. There's a huge disruption thing going. So Trump could get back in and do 4 more years. I think he was tame in his outcomes compared to his bluster, to be honest, when he was president before. So it felt he spoke worse than what happened, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And like you said, there are checks and balances in the American system. And this is what a lot of people don't realise. I mean, you hear a lot of irrational fear in Australia and elsewhere in the world that, if Trump gets in, he'll do all these horrible things to the world. But, I mean, really, like you said, the president is more of a figurehead of a system. And, and like I said, I mean, Trump even said he'd put Hillary in prison. He didn't even try and put her in prison. He just left her alone. And I think, like you said, he's a self-made billionaire. This is what I say to people. I mean, if you're a self-made billionaire, you've got to have an ego the size of Mars. I mean, he's not a normal guy. Most of us do not even aspire to be a millionaire, let alone a billionaire. And so you're not dealing with a normal human being here. But like you said, it's definitely interesting. I'm an Aussie. I'm not invested either way, but it's very, very interesting. Now, let's quickly talk about the UK thing. We're talking about politics. What are your thoughts on the current state of UK politics? Their election, I think, is on Thursday.
Yeah, I think Labor will win that just because it feels like the Conservatives just don't have any framework of actually answering people's questions. And once again, this is what I think there's a disconnect between the ruling class, which has become a ruling class in the Western democracies. So what you're getting is the aristocracy of a late modern age. So in Britain, you're getting, prime ministers coming and going, a bit like Australia, and suddenly someone who's popular is suddenly going to go. And if you think that in England, a migrant family from India, where the man is the prime minister of England, of the UK, who's a migrant Hindu, is the Conservative Party, and it's a knighted ex-Department of, Director of Public Prosecutions who's the Labor Party leader. It feels like everything's flipped. Yeah. And I think it's the ruling class of the Western world that feels it's shaky and people don't trust them. So Starmer will probably win, but within a year there'll be huge grumbles about everything because that's the state we're in at the moment.
Yeah, it's so true. Like even in Australia here, deep down I think we all kind of know it doesn't matter if Labor or the LNP are in power, it seems much the same. And there's still that same level of dissatisfaction with government and just the way society is in general. And as you said, there is an establishment, I think, in all nations, Western nations right now, and they all seem very much the same and very disconnected from the average person on the street.
Well, that's what they call it, the Beltway. What do people think outside the Beltway? And what do people think outside Canberra? What do people think outside a little bit of London or something like that? And people are hurting costs because of anxieties and things like that. So when you get to the stage where you go, I don't care who's in, I just want to throw the furniture around the room, that's a dangerous place to be in a democracy. And I think we're probably there or almost there in a couple of our democracies around the West at the moment. And France is going through the same thing.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and this leads us on to our next topic, Stephen, that there was an article in the ABC recently online talking about young people going back to Latin Catholic mass services, which are very traditional, and they're looking for something that would appear to have more substance to it. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, that was a very interesting article that, if you'd said 30 years ago, young people will sort of disdain modern ways of doing a church in a Catholic setting, you'd have been laughed out of, you've been laughed out of the building. But what you're seeing among what they call the Zoomers, the younger generation, is looking for something that's got some stability to it. Young people saying, you haven't given me anything stable. And because you haven't given me anything stable, I'm going to go to something that's older than me, that's deeper than me, and that requires something from me that would actually discipline my life. And that is almost counterintuitive. And it's not just happening in Catholic churches. The Australian Catholic University's head of theology said one of the issues is that people are going across evangelical churches as well. We're looking for something that's a little bit older than us and a little bit more real and a little bit frameworked rather than just come easy, go easy, because that's not working. Very individualized, very fragmented culture at the moment. So people are looking for something. And it's interesting that young people are coming back to more disciplined, orthodox views of Christianity. Very interesting.
Yeah, and I think this actually ties into what we were talking about earlier with politics, that there's just this sense of no direction, no boundaries. I mean, let's be honest, a lot of young people now would struggle to be able to tell you and I what right and wrong is. You know, what morals really are, like what is the right thing to do, what is the wrong thing to do. And so we've brought up this next generation without any sense of boundaries or traditions that are sacred. Yeah. And it's almost like they're longing for something of substance, aren't they? That is not just flaky and airy-fairy, which doesn't help if you're a young, good-looking worship leader with skinny jeans and teased hair and makeup on, and you just look really cool on the under the lights on the stage, because it's like that seemed to really work 20, 30 years ago. But we got young people now saying, you know what, I don't want that. I actually want something of substance, which has some tradition to it and makes me feel like I'm a part of something a little bit more solid, maybe.
Exactly. And look, it started with the boomer era of let's try to do a church setting that feels like the mall, so that people will come in and go, hey, I thought I was coming into the mall, but it feels like a church. And then what you end up doing is you're giving people things around their felt needs. And one of the issues that is interesting is that we live in such an anxious age, but we don't know where to anchor that anxiety. What's causing it? And if you think about how Christianity is speaking into it, saying, yes, you are really sinful. There is something wrong with you. You've been told there's nothing wrong with you. And then you become anxious because you feel that something is, but you're not allowed to say there is. And then if you have a good doctrine, Christian doctrine of sin, you can go, there is seriously something wrong, but there's a seriously good solution to it. And I think that's part of the anxiety of our age, that people have been told you can be anything you want, you can do anything you want, we won't judge you, but the minute you step out of line, you get shredded. And so that anxiety is around the fact that I know something's wrong, but I'm not allowed to articulate it. And Christianity has got an opportunity to say, we will show you what's wrong, but we'll show you what the solution to that is as well.
Yeah, well articulated, Stephen. And as you said, I mean, the gospel is eternal. It's solid. The Bible is thousands of years old. I think you're right. Christianity has an amazing opportunity now to fill this void that's being left by society. Now, in relation to these young people going to these old, more traditional churches or styles of worship, I do have my concerns with that, because if there's no life in it, if God's not in it, if it's just tradition, then I wonder how sustainable that is for the long term. I know there was one of the mega churches in America that, the dad was a sort of a Baptist-y guy, but, one of these kind of what you call charismatic Baptists, and the church grew to one of the biggest in America. And I know his son went and started a church a few years ago and really modeled it on high church Anglicanism, because he'd grown up in one of these charismatic kind of cool churches. And he went to a city in America there, and it actually failed. The church plant did not succeed, because although he loved the form and the tradition and everything, it wasn't giving life to the people, and no one really gravitated towards it, and the church actually closed down.
Well, that's the thing. If you want to see a closed church in Australia, you can go to a formal-looking traditional mainline church. So it's not just about the form. It has to be about the substance that's contained within it. And if you're not doing good community, costly discipleship, clear gospel framework, a sense that we're here together for each other, we're serving one another, in the midst of that, all you're getting is, well, my preference is candles and smells and bells. Right? And that's just another consumer item. And so if that's all you're doing, then it won't last. But if you're saying we're going back to this because we believe in the traditions that are orthodox and they're grounded in something, that might work. And that's not to say that, you're not going to get... You're still finding that Pentecostal churches are going to be busy and packed, if they're not doing the traditional things, if they get those other things right. If it's deep, meaningful community based around the gospel, I think it works that way. And I think the size on that isn't relevant, but it's those things at the core, that we're looking for meaning and purpose, community and rituals in a good, deep, rich way. And if those are provided the right way, the form doesn't matter so much, but I do think there's something attractive to young people who don't have any sense of history suddenly realising there's something older than themselves and they're returning to it.
Yeah, well put. And I think the challenge for all the Pentecostal church leaders is that they have to provide that substance, and it's through the Word of God, isn't it? It's through the tradition of the apostles, the doctrine of Paul and the New Testament, and even getting people into the Old Testament, because as you and I both know, you can go to a great event, a great church service. We just had one up in Queensland, actually. Will Graham preached on Saturday night at the Gold Coast. Hundreds of people responded. Great event, thousands of people there. But as you and I know, Stephen, when people face tough times, having been to a great church service once upon a time, whether it's last week or last year or last decade, that does not sustain you in the tough times, but the Word of God does, and a deep, genuine connection to God and to community, as you said, good Christian friends. That's what really carries us through, isn't it? And that's what we all have to be providing in, regardless of the church setting we choose to use.
Yeah, look, and I was a consultant. I obviously speak around Pentecostal churches like C3 churches and then Anglican churches. And what I've noticed among the young people, there's a common desire among them across those. The church service looks different, but you meet up with them over coffee or tea or lunch afterwards, and they want to say, how do I, the CBD at the big corporation I work for, how do I live for Jesus in this setting faithfully when everything in the HR department and the way corporations work pull me away? And to me, it doesn't matter whether they're a very Reformed Anglican or whether they're a C3, it's jumping from the chairs. All those young people are asking the same question: how do I do this well for Jesus? And I think there's something, the tides go out, the Christian tide's gone out, but I think it somehow is coming back, maybe in a different way, but they're not as concerned about whether people will like them in the culture. They're saying, no, I want to live for Jesus. It's going to be hard. Show me how to do it well and meaningfully. And I think that's the real positive from what people are leaning into the traditions. That's what's going to work.
Yeah. Well put again, Stephen. Hey, what a joy to speak to you again. Thank you so much for your contributions. And just an update, Biden did make an announcement about 20 minutes ago. Some of us here in the newsroom are hoping that he was going to resign just to make things more interesting, but he's not resigning. He's hanging in there. And at this point, anyway, he's here to stay. So we still have a President Biden in the US. But Stephen McAlpine, I want to thank you so much for joining us. If people want to connect to you via a website or social media, what's the best way for them to reach out to you? StephenMcAlpine.com. My website's just new the last 2 weeks, been updated. It looks all spiffy and new. You can contact me. There's contact forms on that, blogs, podcasts, articles, and various bits of information. If you want me to speak at anything, StephenMcAlpine.com. And that's McAlpine, StephenMcAlpine.com. Stephen McAlpine, I want to thank you so much for joining us on 2020 Today.
Thanks, Andrew. See you later.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.